Welcome to Lecture 2, The Two Sides of Practicing Typography. You'll see in this slide our graphic is split in half, and we have a Frankenstein version of a serif and a sans serif typeface. This gives a little visual metaphor toward what this lecture is about. So the two sides of typography that we're looking at today are anatomy and purpose. So this lecture explores two dimensions of type and typography. The first, which covers anatomy, is our typographic lexicon, or a shared language for talking about type, aka nerd words. Some of the ways we use type expressively and with intention that shape voice, meaning, and impact. And just for you, I have a glossary of all of the nerd words that are mentioned in this lecture so that you can go back and review and get familiar with them. We're going to start with a little wine metaphor, courtesy of Beatrice Ward, in an essay that she wrote in 1930 called The Crystal Goblet. It is historically notable as a call for increased clarity in printing and typography. It is a touchstone for the concept of clear typography and the straightforward presentation of content. You can click on the link here to read the entire essay. I'm going to give you the TLDR. But I also want you guys to note that this is 1930. So we're coming out of the Victorian era, out of the industrial era, where advertising and packaging has exploded. Wooden typefaces, ornamental typefaces are flooding the market, and everything is very visually loud. So Beatrice says, bear with me in this long-winded and fragrant metaphor, for you will find that almost all the virtues of the perfect wine glass have a parallel in typography. Pour and drink, and according to your choice of goblet, I shall know whether or not you are a connoisseur of wine. She presents us with two goblets, the first the golden chalice, the next the crystal goblet. She says, if you have no feelings about wine, one way or the other, you will want the sensation of drinking from a vessel that may have cost thousands of pounds, a very fancy vessel. But if you are an amateur of fine vintages, you will choose the crystal because everything about the crystal goblet is calculated to reveal rather than hide the beautiful thing which it is meant to contain. So what she's saying here is if you choose the crystal, the golden goblet over the crystal goblet, you're choosing the thing that looks fancy, but maybe interferes with the content. We all know that smell of using real silver or metal foodware that picks up that oxidization smell. That interferes with what the crystal goblet does, which is amplifies the smell of the wine. And as you tip the glass, air rushes out and you get that smell of the wine. So the way the wine smells, the glass is designed for. Other things that a connoisseur of wine looks for is its color, which we can't see here, but we can hear. Viscosity, so how thick it is. That's why you see wine connoisseurs swirling their glasses and getting some air into it and then looking at the viscosity. So how thick is it or how much does it stick to the side of the glass? You can't see that with the golden chalice. And so what she's doing is she's making an argument for typography that elevates the message or at least does not obscure the message. And in talking type, designer speak can be intimidating at first, but it is essential to communicate clearly within teams of designers. And additionally, using type speak with stakeholders and clients who don't understand will aid in convincing them of your expertise and your rate, as well as give you an opportunity to teach them about design. Again, reasserting your expertise. So there is a link here that you can click through for a glossary of terms and an illustration that shows just how specific this glossary of terms can be. So things like an ear, this little form that we see that hangs off of the lowercase g or r. The counter of a letter E is called an I. Even this horizontal bar on the 5 is called a flag. And to get even deeper, I provided you guys with this chart. I'm going to read through these terms 1 through 20 and match them with their corresponding name down here. So we're going to start with the lines that are in this image. We have the ascender line. So this is the line that any letter that has an ascender, sorry, will not go above. 2 is the cap height. So all capital letters match this line. Number 3 is the X height. This is the height of the letter X in lowercase. Number 4 is the baseline. And then number 20 is the descender line. So just like the ascender line, this is the descender line. Any part of a letter form that extends below the baseline hits the ascender line. So let's get into the teeny tiny parts here. The top of the letter A, this is an apex. Right here, we're going to see 6 labeled twice on the letter N and the R. At the foot of the letter form, we have these lines that stick out. These are serifs. Number 7, on the double-decker letter A, we call this a belly or a bowl. At the T, we call this a tail or a finial. Inside the letter O and P, this yellow space is called the counter. Right here, the letter Y, we have the descender. So any letter form, the letter P also has a descender that goes below the baseline. That is called a descender. Here, the letter F, you'll also see it on the letter H. The part that extends above the X height is the ascender. Horizontal lines are called bars. Verticals are called stems. You have a letter form that has a counter, but it's not closed all the way. It's called an open counter. So we would have an open counter here on the Y. We'd also have an open counter here on the letter N. The letter G, this one has like 3 very special pieces, right? Just like the letter R, ear, ear. This is called a link, and this is called a loop. And then here on the letter H, we have a shoulder. So you'll also find a shoulder on the letter M, the letter N, so shoulder. And then finally, at the end of this Y right here, we will find a ball finial. So this, when you have a serif typeface and the tails end with this rounded piece, we call that a ball finial. A paragraph also has anatomy, and all of the paragraph elements also have rules. So we're going to start with the drop cap. The drop cap is that large letter. Sometimes it's really ornamental, super decorated. It is the first letter in the first paragraph in a new body of text. So in a chapter book, it would be the first paragraph of a new chapter. In a magazine, it would be the first letter in the first paragraph of a new piece of content. The next piece is the line length, which you see illustrated here with this bar that reaches across. Line length is how we measure how many letter forms fit per one line in a paragraph. The rule is, and just like driving, think 35 to 65. That is a healthy reading line length. Why? Because before we learn to read, we learn to speak. And when we speak, we have breath. We have to stop and take breaths as we speak. The speaking voice, our reading voice, becomes our interior voice. And it also exists as we read. So as we read, we have to give the reader some space to breathe between lines. We don't want to have them reading a really long sentence that they never get to stop and take a break from, and then they keep reading and reading and reading, and they're exhausted, and they don't remember what they read in the beginning, and now they've completely forgotten and lost the plot. We got to break all that up so that they can remember. Number 3, this is called a rag. This is the right-hand rag. So we would say this piece of text is left justified. So left is straight, right-hand rag. So rag is that zigzag at the end of a paragraph. Tracking, number 4, this is how much white space exists in a single line of text. Tracking redistributes white space all the way across. Number 5, leading. This is the empty space or white space that exists between 2 pieces of text. And leading picks up its name from strips of lead that were placed between lines of text in letterpress printing or traditional movable printing. So it's actually named after a physical piece of lead. Number 6, kerning. Kerning is the space between each letter. So remember, Tracking is the whole line. Kerning is the space in between each letter. So adjusting kerning sometimes is necessary. Number 7, the run-in head. The run-in head, you would never actually do a drop cap first paragraph, run-in head second paragraph. They both function the same way. They belong in the first line of a new piece of text. The orphan is where we start to get really morbid. So we have two phrases, the orphan and the widow, and I remember them in this way. An orphan is a child who loses their parents, which means they have no future with their parents, right? So an orphan is a little word left all by itself at the end of a paragraph. These things function kind of like an exit sign, really jarring final piece that breaks immersion for the reader and gives them permission to leave the text. And what our job is to keep the reader immersed. I'm going to talk about more about that in just a sec. Widow. So a widow is a single line of text left alone at the bottom of a page. So a widow is a person who loses the person they were in a relationship with, therefore they have no past. So orphans have no future, widows have no past. Both of these function the same way for the reader. It gives them a chance to leave the text. Finally, we have number 10 is a bad break right here. A bad break is when we hyphenate a letter in the or a word in the wrong way, the wrong place. So when you're trying to figure out where to hyphenate, you can go to a dictionary, you can look up that word, and every time you see that little black bullet point in between syllables, that's where you drop a hyphen. You can also try by putting your, just like when you're in school, put your hand on your chin, another, right? Every time your chin goes down, that's where your syllable is. So not her is not a good place to break that line, right? We can't, our brain can't like mentally fill that in well enough to keep the reading voice nice and fluid. Um, so an, other, and, of, those are where we would break this word up. However, even this word is not that great for breaking up. I generally, myself, my preference is not to leave fewer than 3 letters on either side of the hyphen. So to break up another properly would require that I put a hyphen in between the A and the N or the E and the R, leaving 2 letters, which is less than 3 letters on either side of the hyphen, which tells me what I really could do is just adjust the tracking, the white space here to get that word all up onto one line. So bad breaks, got to watch out for those. All right, now we're moving on to page anatomy. So page anatomy, we have a header. This is our number 1 in hierarchy, the first thing people are going to read. Our subhead, we're pulling them in a little bit, all the way into the body copy, where we want to keep them immersed. So the rule for body copy is no fancy fonts here. You need to keep it serif, sans serif, comfortable, healthy amounts of leading, tracking, no bad breaks, using our lead-in lines and our drop caps appropriately to keep the reader immersed in the content. So if you've ever played a video game for so long that you forgot to eat, go to the bathroom, go to sleep, that is immersion, and that is a designed goal for video games. It is also a design goal for reading. When a typographer is setting text, what we're trying to do is make a comfortable space for the reader to keep them engaged, to allow them to absorb the information. We're making the crystal goblet. We want them to be able to enjoy the message. So number 4, we have a sidebar. We see these a lot in instructional texts and DIYs, books meant for studying and communicating large amounts of information and providing additional context. So here, this is a recipe book. So we have a list of ingredients. If it was a DIY book, it might be a list of materials. So a sidebar comes here. We also have a footnote. And then at the bottom, we have a footer and a folio. So a footer is this part. It tells us what part of the book we're in. It's wayfinding. Number 6 is the folio. This is the page number. What you are looking at right now is UI UX, user interface, user experience. Everything that is designed starts with a book. The book is the first design deliverable with UI UX embedded in it. So, user interface, user experience, we're teaching a user as they go through the cookbook where they should find the name of the recipe, what color the name of that recipe will be in, what typeface, where it will be located. We're teaching them the ingredients every time they find a recipe, where they will find those ingredients. We don't move this back and forth around the page, and sometimes it's up here and sometimes it's down there, and sometimes it's this typeface and sometimes it's that typeface. This is wayfinding. We want to keep it consistent. Um, so UI UX starts with a book. We're going to move it into the semiotics. So the study of signs and symbols and their use or interpretation. So the way a typeface is rendered or its style can evoke different responses from the audience and either support or disrupt the overall vibe of a message. In design speak, we call this the semiotics of type. You can also call this voice. So you can click on this link, get a little lesson on how type, a refresher, how type is the voice. So these are popular logos redrawn using Comic Sans. Designers use semiotic understanding, aka the vibe, to craft typographic solutions that increase the clarity of visual storytelling. The client says the vibe of the brand is classic but not old, mixed with funky but not hippie. How would we do this? We might start looking at classics and funky. So in classics, we see a thick and thin transitional serif. And in funky, we see some distortion, right? In psychedelic poster art, um, bending, scale shifts. Can we find something that maybe blends both of these principles in a way that works for this brand? So I might move towards something like a serif psych hybrid that leans funky, or a transitional serif with some distortion, leaning classic. All right, so now that we've gotten through all of the anatomy, all the vernacular, let's look at ways that we can play with type to tell a story. So, application of type. Kinetic typography is one of my favorites. This describes letter forms that are set in motion and produced for digital presentation. You can pause the video here, watch these two videos. We the People by Tribe Called Quest, which is all kinetic type. And then Ira Glass on storytelling. I want to give you two notes as you watch these. I want you, as you're watching We the People by Tribe Called Quest, to think about the decisions, how the decisions about the way a typeface or the way a message is rendered with a specific typeface, how that typeface says something else about the lyrics. For example, we see that there is a difference between this hand style and a black letter hand drawn approach that reminds us of the Declaration of Independence. We the people, right? So they're saying, who are the people? Calling back to our rights, inalienable rights as Americans. They're communicating all of this with the typeface that they choose for each section of this story in the video. So lyrically, pay attention to what they're saying and how they align that with the kind of typeface that they're choosing. As you watch Ira Glass on storytelling, there are two big things I want you to take away from this. One, how the letter forms and the motion of those forms begin amplifying the story that he's telling, but also hang on to his message, which is that for every storyteller, every creator, there is a gap between what you know is great and where you know you are. And that a lot of us spend plenty of time making and designing things that we don't like. Our taste level is high enough to know that what we're making is not great. But the trick is to keep going. Because the more you go, you'll start closing that gap. And I promise you, you will find a point, you will reach a point where you start liking what you're making. What you're making matches your taste level. Listen to his story, hang on to those words as you go through your design journey as a student. type as image. This is one of my favorites. These are like the dad jokes of type and typography. So, type as image describes typography that has been composed to further illustrate the message of the content without use of illustrative form. So, an elevator, we know, has two buttons, one that goes up and one that goes down. So, by removing the bar from the letter A, and adjusting the contrast between the letter forms, the word elevator makes us think about an elevator and what an elevator does. In the word drop, we see the letter O has slid down the wall. It's dropped, it's smeared. On the right, level tears apart. I mean, this really needs to be torn and not sliced, but we get the point. We get the illustration. The type is torn in half. So again, it's like the dad joke of typography, but I love these. They're so fun. And anytime you find an opportunity to do this, it just feels really exciting. Illustrated type, it's not like type as illustration. Illustrated type describes typography that has been embellished or enhanced to convey the message. This can involve creating type from scratch, by the designer or artist, or modifying or decorating existing typefaces beyond their standard form. So these are some images of type made from scratch. I love this series. It's a design dad who is a typographer who wanted to teach his child the alphabet using design. So A is for applesauce, B is for bacon, C is for cookie, D is for drops like gumdrops. Really cute. He does the whole alphabet. Um, this right here is a really beautiful example of embellishing, right? This is a standard typeface, but the designer, made decisions about chopping it, filling it, having a stroked line, bringing it into 3D space, giving some of it a cast shadow, getting really expressive. And then this is a stamp designed by Jessica Hish, who is a designer that has built her entire career on illustrated type, custom made type, bespoke applications of typography. Really beautiful stuff. Vernacular type is also really fun. This describes typography that is found in public spaces, primarily intended to communicate with the immediate local community. It prioritizes often function over form. It is created by both professional designers as well as amateurs, and it results in a wide range of styles and varying levels of production quality. So, varying levels of production quality from made with a Sharpie to manufactured, from graffiti to hand painted signage, to even neon, right? Neon would be vernacular typography. It is made to communicate quickly to an immediate audience. And I find vernacular type as a wonderful place of inspiration. I particularly love this sign where the person got all the way through all these letter forms and then got to enchilada and couldn't remember how to spell enchilada. And instead of making the sign all over again, they were like, whatever, is it A, E? I don't know. Let's make it both. And so what we have here is like a ligature of the letter E and the letter A. It's got to be right. And then finally, we're closing with our monster of type, Trey Seals. Trey Seals is the founder of Vocal Type, a design initiative born out of a desire to challenge the homogeneity of the graphic design industry. He was frustrated by the monotony of stereotypes in design, and he began questioning whether or not he had chosen the right career. That doubt led to him discovering a startling statistic. Only 3 to 3.5% of practicing designers in America are Black. And he recognized that this lack of diversity was stifling creativity and was perpetuating a singular perspective. And so he launched Vocal Type to bring culture, character, and diversity back into design. So if you take a look at his body of work, he does really great things like he looks at protest posters from the civil rights movement and looks at the hand styles or the hand painted styles that were used to make those signs. And then he uses that as a point of inspiration for developing an entire font, an entire typeface, which is pretty cool. He does a lot of interviews, a lot of great talks, and I think you would enjoy a deeper dive into his work. So if you click through his photograph, in the slide deck, it'll take you into his portfolio and his body of work. Thank you for choosing me again as your professor. I look forward to continue working with you in the coming weeks.